Hey there, this is Lauren Kimball for ANI 150, and this tutorial is going to review how to compile your construction sheet for your exercise 1. Now here is what the finished construction sheet all compiled is going to look like, but we're going to start here. So if you're in my ANI 150 class, you can download this Photoshop file off of Canvas. It is made up of several folders, as you can see here, a header folder, an images folder, and a miscellaneous folder. It also has a background image. Now, for some of you, when you open this file, you may see this. You can turn these guides off with Control colon. It's right next to the L key on your keyboard. These guides are just to help things snap into place so that when you bring your images in, you've got these guides secretly working in the background to make it easier to line up your maps and your renders. So the first folder is your header folder, and inside the header folder you have this text box that contains your assignment title, your student name, your poly count. So just press T on the keyboard and you're able to click and edit this box. So the assignment title in this case would be food can, unless you're working on your dice, in which case you'd put dice. Student name, just go ahead and put in your first and last name. So for me, it'd be Lauren Kimball. And then the last one is your poly count for that mesh. Now to access your poly count, you're going to want to open up Maya and have your scene open for whether it's the food can or the dice. So right now I've got my high poly can front and center. I don't really care about the poly count on my high poly can because the high poly can is only used for baking information. So I'm going to turn that off and I'm going to access my low poly can. This is the one whose poly count I care about. Now to access the poly count, you're going to want to go to Display, Heads Up Display, and activate the poly count window, which opens this little table up here in the upper left-hand corner of my scene, or of my perspective cam. So I'm going to click on the can, and when I click on it, I can look under Faces and see that I have 48 faces on the can I have selected. Now, I've addressed this in other tutorials before, but just as a quick review, the first column shows you all the faces that exist in your scene or what's turned on in your scene. So if I turn on the high poly can, oh, there it goes, it just updated. When I turn on the high poly can, you see the combination of the faces on the high poly can and low poly can together. When I click on just the low poly can, the second column shows me all the information on what I have selected. And if I were to go into component mode and click on a face, this final column tells me how many faces or tries or verts I have selected on the object. So first column has to do with everything in my scene, second column has to do with my object selection, and the third column has to do with component selection. So just a quick review on that. I'm going to turn off the high poly can, click away. All right, so I've got 48 faces. That's what matters on this can. I'm going to minimize this window, click it back into Photoshop, tap T for text, click over here. Now, if you accidentally click on something other than the text box, it may do this to you, so just be aware. This is just creating a new text layer, and the font's really small right now, but it might be bigger for you, in which case you can get rid of this by dragging it to the trash can. And then trying again, hover over the text and then click. All right, so I'm going to change this. How many faces was it again? I distracted myself. 48 faces. So let's go back to Photoshop and we're going to type in 48 faces. That's it. Now over here we've got the software logos, and you can choose to have them on or off, or if you, for instance, didn't use Photoshop, maybe you only used Maya and Substance Painter, you can turn off the software that you didn't use, realign them if you need to, whatever. It's just an optional thing that adds a little extra, a little extra element to your document. All right, I'm going to close up the header, and now let's look at the images folder. In this folder there is one background image that is slightly gray. You can turn this off if you want. You could change the color. I don't really mind. It's only there to show you that there are these windows, and these windows are actually areas that have been masked out. The mask is sitting on the folder. The reason we do that is that anything I drag into this will automatically be put behind this mask so that just to help you align everything a little bit better. The final folder is in red because I don't really want you to mess with it. It's also locked up, and all it is just the extra text. So along the border of these four smaller windows, normal, ambient occlusion, roughness, color, it's telling you what maps that I want in each of these areas. All right, so now that we're done with this, let's go ahead and open up Substance Painter, and I'll show you how to get your 2D maps. So going back to the finished example, we're going to have some 2D maps that we're going to kick out of Substance Painter and 2 renders. All right, so let's go ahead and minimize Photoshop and open up Substance Painter. If your Substance Painter doesn't quite look like mine, that's all right. You can change the viewport by pressing F1, F2, or F3. F1 being a split screen, F2 being your 3D view, and F3 being your 2D view. Now, for this construction sheet, we want to export 2 of our channel maps, the color map and the roughness map, and 2 of our mesh maps being maps that we've baked. And we're going to want to export the ambient occlusion and the normal map. So to get there, I want to click on File, Export Textures. When you have this menu open, the first thing I want you to do is set your output directory. Where are you kicking this to? I'm going to kick it to my desktop so that it's easy to find. Next, output template. This is either going to tell you project defaults or it's going to say PBR metallic roughness. So I'm going to just go with PBR metallic roughness because that matches the template that I built the assignment in. You can always click on this menu and look for it if you need to. All right, file type. I want to go ahead and set this to PNG because PNG is a lossless format and we're not going to have to worry about compression issues that you get with, like, say, a JPEG. For size, you can keep that the same. For padding, I recommend changing it from dilation infinite to dilation and default background color. It's just more aesthetically pleasing. Both maps will work the same if you were to upload it into another software like Maya or Marmoset. But I think if you're going to present it on a document, having a default background color is a better choice. Next, click on Standard Surface, because that's the name of the material that this was assigned to this can. By default, everything is checked, so all the channel maps will be exported. Go over here and click on this drop-down menu and click Uncheck All, because the only 2 maps we want are the color map, which is right here, and the roughness map, which is right underneath it. Now, part of the word for roughness has been obscured a bit, so you can hover over and actually see the name. Another way to do this is to click on List of Exports and double check that you do in fact have the base color and the roughness map selected, and then go ahead and export. Minimize this. There we go, 2 fresh, clean maps. So there's my color map, there's my roughness map. Let's go ahead and open up Photoshop again. And we're going to click on the background image here inside the folder, drag and drop our color map, and voila, there it is. I'm going to align this with the grid. See, make it snap to that corner where the color map is going to go. If you need to, you can press Control: to make sure that it's snapping with the guides. I'm going to go ahead and hold down Shift, which does not maintain the nice constraints, but we don't need them because this area is a perfect square, so it should align really nicely. That's strange. It's not quite lining up. There we go. So I want to make sure it lands nicely within that square. All right, let's go over here and double click this, drag in the roughness map. Just going to zoom in a little bit. Control T. And I want this to line up with this other box. Hold down Shift. Zoom. Oops. That did not behave. Let's try again. Hold down Shift, snap it into place, press Enter, zoom in, let's double check. Looks good. Looks like it came up a little short there. Yeah, these guides were pre-set up to be perfect squares, so that's why you can use free transform without the constraints and just make it snap to each side and you'll get that perfect square. All right, perfect. So now we've got roughness and color put in. Let's go back into Substance Painter and let's export the mesh maps. So I'm going to go File, Export Textures, and this time, instead of using PBR output template, I want to click on Mesh Maps because these are the ones we baked, right? Go back to Standard Surface, uncheck all of these, and we're looking for the normal base. Remember, there's a couple of different normal maps, world normals, directional normals. We're looking for just normal base. And we are also looking for the ambient occlusion, which it's the only one that has the word illusion right here. But again, you can hover or you could check on the list of exports to confirm. And there's your normal base. There's your ambient occlusion. Let's click export. Perfect. Check our desktop. And there's our AO map. There's our normal map. Go back to Photoshop. And let's drag these in. First, the AO map. Hold down Shift. Snap it into place. Let's double check our grids. Yeah, it looks perfect. Again, hotkey is Control colon. Colon key is right next to the letter L. And then the normal map. Hold down Shift. Snap it into place. Looks like it needs a little snap there. Perfect. And there we have it. Let's go ahead and name these. I'm going to call this one AO for short, for ambient occlusion, and this one normal. And there we have our 2D texture maps. All right, let's go ahead and jump back into Substance Painter so that we can kick out 2 renders. I'm going to start by taking this from my 2D view to my 3D view. I can just press Function 2 to do that. Then I'm going to change the mode. So mode-wise, you have 3 mode options in Substance Painter depending on what version of Substance Painter you're running. If you're running the most recent version, then you're going to have a bake mode, a painting mode, and a render mode. For me, I'm running an older version, so I only have the painting and the render mode. Go ahead and click on the render mode, and things will look a little bit different. You'll notice that every time you move your can around, there's all this speckling. That's because every time you move your can around, iRay, which is the render engine for Substance Painter, is rendering. And you can see right here in orange lettering the word rendering. And it won't be power set to 1000 or max time, which is set to 210 for some reason, but it's to be set to 10 seconds. That's very funny. I don't know how that happened. There goes, done. So generally speaking, you can increase your render quality by adjusting these settings, the number of samples or the amount of time that a render is allowed to be. The default settings are 5, 1000, and 10. And that's fine. That'll work just fine for this can. The render looks good. If you have a more complex surface, when the render is done, you might notice speckling, or maybe the render just doesn't feel like it's fully fleshed out. In which case, that's when you would mess with these by either increasing samples or increasing time. Just know that if you increase any of these things, it's going to add to, obviously, how long it takes to render. So in the 10 seconds that this was allowed to render, it went through about 480 of the 1000 iterations. If I gave it more time, it could go through more iterations, but it doesn't need it because the can looks fine. You'd know if the can didn't look fine. You could increase the render time. You could increase the variables. All right, so the other 2 options here, you've got caustic sample enabled off. Caustic has to do with how light hits glass or water, so you don't have to worry about that. And then underneath it, the firefly filter is on, as it should be. Fireflies are like it's a name for the effect that occurs when there are hot spots in your render, meaning occasionally when rays are bouncing off the mesh and bringing image information back to the camera, there'll be specks of white on occasion, little fireflies as they're called. This filter just buffs them out. So I would just leave this on. And let's go and adjust some of the render settings because there's things I don't particularly like about this. One, I don't want to have the grass on here, and I also want to change some of the lighting settings. So over here on the right side of our screen, you see this. You can click on that, and that will activate the display settings window. This button right here allows us to undock it, and when we do, it automatically wants to dock down here. If it doesn't dock down here, you can drag and drop the window so that it does dock right here. All right, let's go through some of these display settings. All right, at the very top, we've got environmental map set to panorama. We talked about this in class. Substance Painter uses something called image-based lighting, meaning that it takes an HDR, high dynamic range image, and it will use the HDRI to determine the lighting in the scene. So whatever lighting is in that special photograph is going to be reflected on our mesh through a process called image-based lighting, and that is what Substance Painter relies on. So you can go in here and actually change the environmental map. You can choose a different setting if you want, or lighting layout. There's a whole bunch of options here. You can also download these on the internet using something like IBL Labs, where they've got a lot of free HDR images that are already prepped for image-based lighting. All right, so I'm going to scroll down. Because this is an HDR image, we have lots of options as far as the exposure level. We could take this down or raise it up if we want different lighting layouts. I think generally keeping it in the middle will be just fine. Environmental rotation allows us to rotate the environment and thus change the way the light hits. Now, I prefer to set alignment from world to camera. And what that does is now, wherever the camera is set, the lighting locks with the camera, so I can rotate around my object and maintain the same lighting. If I have it set to world, then it's like rotating around in world space. I just prefer to have it in camera because there's lighting I like. I don't have to maneuver the can to get the right set. So I'm just going to tweak the environment until I get a lighting that's really clear and crisp, and that's what I'll stick with. All right, next underneath that, we have our dome settings, and under dome settings, we have clear color. You can change this to any background color you want for your image. It will not affect the lighting. It's only a flat color that's showing the background. I prefer keeping it black. All right, and so now I can go ahead and start kicking out some renders. I'm going to choose an angle of the can that I really like, bring it in close, and just let it render. Maybe I'll show a little bit more at the top. Looks like it hit 10 seconds first, about 183 iterations. If there was anything wrong with this render, like I feel like it needs more time, I could go in and actually type in more time or more samples. So let's go ahead and click Save Render, and I'm going to save it to my desktop. And I'm going to call this Render 1 and save. Now I'm going to choose a different angle. I think I'm going to show off the back of my can and a little bit underneath because I got some interesting texture work underneath my can. Zoom it in, bring it in a bit closer. Process. I think this lighting right here feels a little artifacty. Maybe it's for the sake of showing you. Let's increase the render time. So it's gonna just, looks like additional ribbons aren't really that. Probably just need to change my camera angle. But that would be an example of me wanting to push the render and give it more time to cook. All right, save render. Render 2. And I can minimize this, and I see my 2 renders on my desktop. Let's open up Photoshop. Let's drag and drop render number 1 in. This time I'm not going to use shift when I transform because this isn't a perfect square. I'm just going to scale and maneuver it until it looks good. Use my arrow keys if I feel so inclined and press enter. And then grab render number 2 and thing. Not holding down shift this time because I don't want anything like this to happen. Now I can scale this up or down because this is technically a smart image. What does that mean? When I dragged and dropped this in, you'll notice that it's got this interesting icon here. That just indicates that it's being sampled from an original image. and it's not the actual image that's brought in. That helps prevent pixelation. So just letting you know that you can go ahead and shrink this way down, for instance, and then if you wanted to scale it back up, it's not going to affect the resolution because it's a smart image. If you had taken this directly into Photoshop without it being a smart layer, then there'd be massive pixelation. Just give you a heads up. And that's it. That's all you need. Then you can go ahead and kick this out of Photoshop by going File, Export, Export MG, and you can name it according to the turn-in expectations. So last name underscore ANI 150 underscore can, I think it was CS for construction sheet. Check the Dropbox to be sure and save it, and you're done. Repeat, rinse and repeat this process for your dice. And if you have any questions, be sure to let me know.